Thank you for the reading of the word. Today's text has some familiar themes anchoring the justice, advocacies, and actions of the church and society. In some organizations, these have come or have become core values, values that define their mission and vision. These values promote the well-being of the people and the rest of creation. The call to justice is not an exclusive call of the church, but it is a call of religious groups. However, Micah lifts up a critical component about the call to justice for the church and community. It is about God's agenda and God's mission. This call to justice, love, kindness to God defines the collective identity of the community of faith or the people of God, regardless of the political landscape and period we are in. This call serves to expose the injustices that affect everyone in our communities. Micah, as a contemporary of Isaiah, is aware of the covenantal obligation of both Israel and Judah. Micah shows us how God's covenant impacts the community in this section of the prophecy. Both Israel and Judah were expected to abide by the terms of the covenant and share that covenantal import with each other and the rest of the surrounding peoples. They were to be obedient to God as a covenanted people. They were called to holy living. But this is not the case here. Micah identifies that the people have been unfaithful to God and their covenant obligations. This necessitates a conversation between God's people and God. The conversation is presented in the form of a court session. You have witnesses who are summoned. The mountains, hills, and the enduring foundations of the earth are the witnesses to this case. It is interesting to see a shift in the way creation is participating in the covenantal dialogue between God and God's people. Historically, people would call on the mountains or the hills or creation to be witnesses when expressing their trust and also expressing or offering praise to God. We get this sense from Psalm 121. This time, creation participates as witnesses of God's faithfulness to the covenant. This section, verse 1 and 2 particularly, does not only provide the setting and background of this conversation, but identifies God's connectedness and concern for the people. It disputes an idea that suggests that God is unaffected by whatever happens to God's people and creation. Rather, it tells us that God is affected by whatever happens to God's people. Conversation with them so that they can awaken their consciousness. God moves to engage with the people so that they can depart from the wrong and center themselves on God and God's agenda. When we think deeply about this conversation, we can connect with the ethical implication or implications of Epiphany. In most of our readings, our Epiphany message focuses not only God's holiness, emphasizing the ethical implications. It is a moment of rediscovery what God is and what that means for them and others. In this way, they are called to experience the God as covenanted people. So, reflecting on this story, we recognize God's manifestation, movement, and involvement for the sake of re-establishing an identity of God's nature. Meet where we are, irrespective of the darkness. God illuminates God's will and calls us to faithfulness and bold discipleship in this world. God shows us love, justice, kindness, and care to share with the strangers and neighbors in order to counter systemic injustices. Micah shows us how God engaged the people of Israel. God reminds them of divine act from of leadership through Moses and Miriam. God further reminds them of the action from the schemes of Balak and Balaam, and also the given or forgetfulness or amnesia, and to awaken their consciousness about again and again in their lives. Forgetfulness for the people of Israel, because the moment they are likely to forget what God requires of them as they live with one another. Through this historical connection, God's people may know or remember the righteous saving acts of God. Forgetting God's divine intervention and the radical inbreaking affects the way we deal with the layers of injustices in our community. Memory of divine works and the purposes of God Israel to remember that God detested injustices then and continues to detest injustices today. So injustices done yesterday, injustices done today, or injustices done tomorrow are contradicting God's design of life. One of the many post-colonial biblical scholars known by the name of Gregory L. Queller comments on this book of Micah says, Micah calls the community to remember, to resist the social and political forces that benefit from forgetting. Additionally, they should remember in order to reanimate the collective identity grounded in justice and freedom. By obedience, Israel will reflect God's faithfulness within and outside their communities. So the court session drama gets interesting here when God's people take a moment to respond. They ask what to bring before God. In trying to build their defense, they indicate all possible things they would have carried for their religious rituals. The use of hyperbole is not unusual with Israel. This exaggerated way of creating a defense is not unusual for this community. In this case, they move from calves to thousands of rams, to 10,000s of rivers of oil, and including firstborn children, as things they can offer to God. All these sacrifices are unable to merit the transaction of divine favor. No amount of rituals and sacrifices can buy God's favor. Human response should focus rather on the call of God and living out that call. This is what Micah responds to them. Micah presents the response of God rooted in three things. And God requires of them to do justice, to love kindness, and to walk humbly with God. This makes the covenantal blessing to be embodied in their actions and living out this blessing in the community that God has given them. These three values show a relational faith rooted in equity and compassion, care and love. Israel is reminded that right worship cannot be separated from right relationships. Israel is reminded again that piety cannot be separated from justice. When you are worshiping God, there is need for right relationships. When you are walking a pious life, there is need for also keeping justice with you. These are inseparable. Our encounter with God should lead us to seek justice that challenges the systemic injustices. The call is to seize the wheels of injustices so that the oppressed can be liberated from the chains of oppression. Micah has given us a picture of what God requires of us. God is calling us to justice, to love kindness, and to walk humbly with God. This God requires of us to be ready to step into the world and bear witness to the justice of God. Our participation in justice will free the systems of justice so that justice can benefit all God's people rather than benefiting a few. This task, however, is not easy. It is only attainable with God guiding us through and through. Thus, we need to continuously seek God's blessings as we step into the world to participate in the creation of justice now and going forward. May God bless us all. Amen.